either buttresses or disagrees with their argument, and what that means. So, analysis of criticism. I haven't even put theory in here yet, but obviously if we do theory as well, this paragraph is going to be, a page and a half, 2 pages long. And even at that length, the paragraph probably isn't going to do its job particularly well, because it will be jack of all trades, master of none. So this is the problem I want you all to solve, and I don't really care if you do it via having a methodology and a literature review section at the start of your essay, or if you solve it in some other way. But what I'm about to propose to you is a radical intervention in solving this problem. Too radical for some students, and also potentially too radical for professors. So don't necessarily reflexively use this structure for all literature professors. But I can assure you that this is one of the good standards in journal publication. Lots of humanities scholars, not just literature scholars, use this approach, especially scholars of the contemporary and postmodern and modern, because they are the ones that most frequently tend to use theory. But some critics from other literary epochs use this approach as well. They might not have so much of a methodology, but their approach to criticism might be extremely robust, and it can be quite difficult to include the criticism as a result, because there'll be a lot of it. So we've got to solve this problem. So I guess before I do the literature review, let's just talk about another method you can use if you're too scared by the methodology and literature review. Feel free to do this if you want. I'm not sure it's as potentially transformative in the sense of how you approach the arrangement of your work. This is just an undergraduate degree, you're supposed to be experimenting. So any structure you use should be a choice on your part rather than enforced because it's the only one you know how to do and the only one you're comfortable with. You'll never get out of that unless you experiment. But if you don't want to do the methodology and the literature review, you've got to remember the number one rule about paragraphs, which is one major idea per paragraph. So let's say you've made some big claim about a particular moment or section from Virginia Woolf's Orlando, and you have done a pretty rigorous close analysis. So this is a paragraph on, let's say, the Victorian apocalypse in Orlando. At this point, the normal student whose work I read will tack on some criticism within the same paragraph and turn this beautiful, punchy, concise paragraph into an unwieldy, wobbly, junky of a paragraph that's like screeching all over the place and going on forever and hard for me to follow. So don't do that. What you can do is observe the rule, which is one major idea per paragraph, and that means what you can do is you can then have a new paragraph where you talk about the critical response to the moment you've just been talking about and or the claim you've been making about this moment. So here's another paragraph where you do criticism. Just remember that when you're asked to do criticism, it's not just for the professor's own selfish elevation. It's that we're asking you to do criticism because at the third and fourth year level, you can no longer pretend that you're working in a vacuum, and that even though we know our ideas aren't original at the second year, we kind of pretend they are because we don't talk about anyone else's ideas. Criticism is there to demonstrate that your ideas are taking place in a much wider conversation about the texts you've chosen and the ideas you've elected to focus on. So you're supposed to be articulating where your ideas fit in to what other people have said. And this is an end in and of itself. It's valuable, but it's also valuable because it holds you to account. How credible are your ideas? I see this all the time. If no one has said anything related to your big argument about Virginia Woolf, either you are an amazing critic who has seen something in Orlando that no one else has seen, or you're just wrong. And at the undergraduate level, you have to assume it's the second one. Unless you've been getting A pluses in 3,000 and 4,000 level courses all over the shop, you're probably wrong. Criticism allows you to see this. A lot of the time people say, but prof, I can't find criticism. That's because your Google foo is weak. So here's how you find criticism. Let's say you have decided to make the argument that Virginia Woolf's feminism is limited to middle-class women. So here's how not to do it, but here's what, as far as I can tell, most students do. They will search on the university library search function, or they might go to Project Muse or JSTOR, and they will enter a search string like Orlando middle class feminism. And like 2 or 3 articles will pop up after out of the thousands and thousands available. And then the student will be like, but the prof asked me for 6 critical articles. How on earth am I supposed to do it? The prof's being unfair. No, you're just doing it wrong. If you do this hyper-specific kind of search string, you'll never find anything. For a start, look, you put Orlando, not Woolf. Mistake. Middle class is kind of hyper-specific. And also feminism is potentially too limiting. These websites do not have good sort of tag aggregation functions and stuff like that. So feminism, too limiting. You know, women, you could even just get rid of that and just go middle class or even just class. You could search for Woolf and class, and then you'll get a bunch of articles. And unfortunately then you're just going to have to go through them and find the parts that are relevant to you. So normally I have a lot of sympathy for undergraduate students. You all have to, do part-time jobs and your tuition is too expensive. And I sometimes go on too many tangents. But this is a situation where I have zero sympathy for you, because I learned to do my literary criticism with no digital sources whatsoever. And that means I didn't have Control F. So, to find criticism, you've got 2 options. You can either search for ideas, like we did up here, middle class feminism, or you can search for moments from the novel. And if your search foo is good, you'll get a lot of articles based off searching for ideas, and you can whittle them down based on looking for key moments. So here's the thing. We've already established this. This is how you come up with your structure. You've got to make sure you're talking about major moments from the text at some point. And some moments are more important than others. If you're writing an essay on Orlando and you don't talk about the moments when she changes sex/gender, what the hell are you writing about? You're writing about Woolf's great androgynous utopia and you're not talking about androgyny and gender? That's not a good idea. Critics have the same problem. Critics have to account for some of the key moments in the novel, no matter what they're writing about. So that means you can always use Control F when you're going through the 20 articles you might have downloaded to search for quotations from the novel that are most important for your argument, and you can see what critics have said about them. It's a super powerful way of doing your research, and it's very fast. See what critics have said about them. If the critics agree with your reading, fantastic. You've established your credibility beyond the undergraduate level. If your critics disagree with you, that's potentially even better, because then you can talk about why they're wrong. It gives you more opportunity to talk about how great your analysis is. Or you might be finding out that your reading of that moment is bad before you hand it in to me. And then you can rejig it based on your sort of the implicit feedback you've got from the criticism before I even see it. So it's a win-win for everyone. So there you go. If you don't want to do the literature review section and potentially the methodology section, one idea per paragraph. You can do a piece on the Victorian apocalypse and you could say what the critics have said about the Victorian apocalypse. You could do a bit of response as well in here, or you could box out your response into another paragraph and talk about another related moment in the text, or if the critics have introduced an idea that requires you to talk about a different moment in the text than the Victorian apocalypse, go straight on and talk about that idea next. So you can alternate, right? You could do paragraph on a moment from the text, what the critics have said. You could even do 2 paragraphs on what the critics have said if that works for you. You could do a couple of paragraphs on a couple of key points you want to make, progress your argument a bit, and then have a paragraph on the criticism of that new point in your argument you're trying to make. Again, this is why I was a bit vague last time, but hopefully you can see what I'm talking about.